Southern Florida boy, there's a green light on that dude, bro. There's a green light on that dude. They can say he's a nice guy all day, but trust me, it's on site. You know what I'm saying?
Okay, yeah. If I knew, if I was around or had the contacts, I could speak more about it.
But that's another crazy guy. That's one guy. When I look at his career in the UFC, beast of an athlete, beast of a wrestler in college, he's undeniable. I can hate his persona all day, but he's undeniable.
Yeah.
But it's almost to this detriment of his persona. And do you think, I feel like you can't fake the funk when you're at that high level. You can't fake it. I think he's gifted, but I think there's a reason he's not champion, and I think it's because he's faking the funk.
It could be. I mean, it could be. Like, when you are, like, to be at your absolute best, to be, fire tested, like, you got to put yourself out there, and if it's not real, then you could get exposed. Yeah. Do you think it's a personality thing? Or do you think it's a skill level? Like, Usman is a monster.
No. Skill level, he has the same, slightly different, obviously. Right. And Usman is the toughest dude on the planet now, right? Yeah. Like, regardless of what you think about the guy, he's the toughest dude on the planet.
But he seems so secure with himself.
Because
no matter what, he's good.
100% himself.
Right.
He's 100% himself. Because when you look at skill level at that top 5 range in the UFC, in boxing, in basketball, in the NFL, the difference isn't skill level. It's mentality, right? And I look at a guy like Colby Covington who has all the physical attributes to be a world champion. He is number one in his division outside of the 2 losses to Kamaru Usman. Yeah. And the only thing I can go back, and I'm looking at all his fights and everything else, and I'm like, it's the fucking persona. It's the fucking persona.
It could be.
No. And the reason I say this is because in comedy, there are guys that are really funny, naturally really funny, and they seem to take a little longer to boil and become more mainstream versus guys who kind of put on that persona of the, oh, I'm edgy, or oh, I'm, a Mitch Hedberg, or whoever, right? And those guys will get pushed quick because they have good material, but then they burn out quick. Mm-hmm. I look at a guy like Colby Covington, was like, this dude is getting exposed in the mental side of things. And I'm not saying he's not tough. I'm not saying
he's a tough dude. I'm
not saying he's not athletic. I'm not saying he's not one of the best in the world. But to make it to that top of the heap is like, how secure do you have to be with yourself?
Yeah.
To assume the throne. And I look at a guy like Kamaru Usman, GSP, even
look at all the greats. All the greats, like, did a loss define them?
No, for sure.
Like, do they want to win? Yeah, they're going to train their their life depends on it. But I think you were talking about earlier as well, is they focus almost more on the process, like how to win. And I was just talking with this. I work with the youth competition team in jiu-jitsu. And we were just talking this week about process versus outcome-focused thinking. So if I am outcome-focused, I define success as whether I won or lost. So my checklist of success after a match is, did I win? Yep. Check. Done. That I was successful. Did I lose? Yep. Okay, I wasn't successful. Or I can think about, well, how am I going to go about winning? So if in jiu-jitsu, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, if I dictate the pace, if I feel like I'm in control, if I'm controlling the match, that's something that's mostly within your control, right? If I get in solid positions, maybe. What else helps somebody perform well?
I mean, it depends on the person, right? Like if I was coaching Mason, our producer, who is a very salty white belt, that is gonna be, I think, he's gonna be a very good competitor if he continues to go. I look at his body attributes and I see what he's strong at, and I always say, well, number one, you're 100% dictate pace. If you can dictate pace and you can put a pace on somebody, that's always a huge thing. But it's also, tactically, where do you want to be most comfortable at, right? So in jiu-jitsu, I always tell the guys that when I've coached before, I was like, hey, where do you feel the most comfortable in the fight? Force that position, right? If it's pulling guard, if it's running a double leg, if it's getting to side control, getting to mount, whatever you do, your first objective, as soon as they go, poha, right? That's your goal.
Yeah.
That's your first goal. When you get there, then you think about the next position, because a lot, and especially in grappling, it's very different than, a boxing match. It's very different than even a basketball game. It's like it's all on you to dictate where you want to go, right? And if you don't, then you get lost in the sauce, like Daniel Cormier likes to say.
Yeah.
It's a thing. It's a thing. To me, and when I've competed, it's like I've had matches where I was able to dictate pace. I was able to get those takedowns, and one wrong mess up, I lose, and it's like, whatever, I lost.
Yeah, but that's such a good point, though. So you have these things that are within your control. We'll call it, that's our process checklist. Mm-hmm. Like 4 things that you can do. In basketball, like you can control rebounding, you can control your defensive effort, you can mostly control turnovers, probably like, being careful with the ball. If you do those things, are you likely going to win? Yeah, like people who turn the ball over less, who rebound better, who play good defense, like those, who take good shots, generally win. But like you said, sometimes you get caught. So if you get caught and you lose, if you do all those things, like, hey, was I successful? Well, let me go to my process checklist. Well, did I control the pace? Yes. Okay, check mark. Did I get into my positions that I wanted to, my game plan? No. Okay, so this is now here. This is what I need to focus on in training going forward. It doesn't mean that the match was a failure. It just means that this is a learning experience for me to move training on.
It's all data collection. I've always looked
data
at
collection.
It's always been like, even when because I take the same mindset into stand up of the athletic, of all my years of competing and training. It was like every set is good or bad. It has nothing to do with what I want. Like, it's always long-term plan, obviously, get paid and buy a house and all that with comedy. But set to set, it's all data collection. It's like, okay, I have this new joke. I know it's funny. Let's see if this crowd thinks it's funny. And where is it funny to me versus where is it funny to the crowd is 2 different things.
Oh, really?
It's very, very different. Like, sometimes you'll write a punchline, like, knock, knock, who's there? And then they laugh at the knock, knock instead of the who's there. Okay. And then you're like, well, what is it about this joke that I thought was funny, but they're not laughing? They're laughing at the setup, not the punchline. Where do I have to go back and adjust and then try again?
So that's curious. So do you follow the laugh solely, or you're like, no, like, I know this is good, and maybe it just was the audience that night?
Well, there's that.
Okay,
so there's that, right? So you have think about, are you a pro wrestling fan?
I used to be hardcore into WWE.
Okay, so
not
it's
15 years probably.
Okay, are you a fan of Ric Flair?
I never was.
You never was a
Ric Flair guy.
Okay.
Stone Cold, The Rock,
Stone Cold Steve Austin.
Undertaker.
Okay, I'm gonna go a little more old school because he talks about this in a documentary, and this is actually what helped me with my comedy more than anything. Jake the Snake.
Okay.
Jake the Snake Roberts. He talks a lot about crowd psychology, right? He was like, you want the crowd to have a reaction towards you. Now is what you do with that reaction that's very, very beneficial for what you want to do. And I took that same idea into stand-up, and it transformed the way I perform. Because now, and I'm going to give away some material if you've never seen me. So I have this joke. It's a very topical joke, so it's probably not going to be in my set in the next week or so. It's very dark. There was this family in Florida that got charged for child neglect because they starved their toddler down to 9 pounds. Right? Super dark, right? Punchline is they're just helping her get started with her modeling career. Right?
Yeah.
I know eccentrically, it's a dark subject, but the twist on that is very, very funny. Right? When that joke went well the first time, I've done it a couple times since, And the reaction to the crowd, and I'll show you a video later, people literally go, "Oh my God," or they're like, "Oh no, that's not funny." But it's like, to me, that's a reaction that I almost expected. So
was the "Oh my God"?
Yeah, was the house like, "Oh, did you just say that?" I'm like, "Yes, I did." But it's one of those things. It's like I'm expecting the crowd to react in a way. Best reaction in a stand-up room is laughter. Obviously, that's the number one thing I'm chasing. Yeah. But the oohs, the ahs, the claps, the cheers, those are all reactions that help me improve my set. But obviously, I don't want people just clapping because I said something they agree with. I want them to laugh at something they weren't expecting.
Right.
So all that is data for me to go back into the notebook, rewrite, and then go try again.
Yeah. So that's your style, is like the uncomfortable. That's like...
Hey, what do you call my style, Mace? Fuck
cute.
you. Cute.
Yeah.
I'm wearing it right here.
It says Puerto Rico on his shirt.
Specifically to upset it.
Yeah, it's good.
That's
good.
The fuck. Oh my God. Hey, look, she's grabbing coffee. All right. No, it's interesting because I look at it and it's like in sport, I feel that the reason like boxing or boxers and wrestlers do so much better in the pros compared to MMA guys as far as success, because they were able to have so many years of data collection before they got to the game.
Like amateur, yeah. Well, they probably also, you see this in MMA too, but it happens quicker. Like they go pro quicker, or they get bigger. Like, I'm in the UFC, I'm headlining, and I'm 7-0. You know, like versus boxing is I'm headlining, I'm 38-0. Like, well, you're picking and choosing a lot of like all those fights.
Oh, for sure.
You have a high probability of success.
I want to give you a little pushback on that. I think it's the promoters know when they have somebody special, right? Take a Bob Arum, for example. One of my favorite boxers of all time, Miguel Cotto. Mm-hmm. Extensive amateur career. Silver medalist in the Olympics. Then he went through the ranks in his first couple of years as a pro pretty quickly. But I don't think it was because of lack of competition. I think it's the promoters know. It was like, this guy's special. He's going to get to the Sugar Shane Mosleys. He's going to get to the Floyd Mayweathers eventually, and he's going to be able to compete very well. But he needs that kind of big light experience so he can perform the best later. I think great promoters know how to bring up a good fighter. And yes, those fights are kind of handpicked to kind of test them in one aspect of his style or the other. And then eventually they can't hold him back anymore, right? There's a great example right now. It's kind of Ryan Garcia, great up-and-coming prospect. I think he's getting to that point in his career where he's going to have to start taking those crazy tough fights because they can't hold him back anymore. They just can't. Like, they're running out of bums to give him. And I hate to call them bums because it takes a hell of a human being to get up there and perform. But just skill level, you're like, okay, this dude is just beyond all these guys. It is.
Yeah.
And then he's looking at facing, guys like Tank Davis and, Errol Spence down in the future. And you're like, okay, this guy's going to have to be ready. Is he ready? We don't know until he gets in there.
You don't know until you get in there.
But he has enough fights in his bank to know it's like, oh, there's enough data collection so it can perform here. Doesn't mean he's going to. Nothing's guaranteed. Yeah. But he has enough data collection. And I think it's the same way because I look at stand-up. 10, 15 years to become a legit professional headliner to go to a club. And it was like, yeah, because he needed to go up 5 times a week to collect that data to see if he's good.
Yeah. But you're not... I don't think that's a fair parallel because you're like going and testing the limits each time, right?
Yeah, of course.
Where, like, I remember when I was with Jackson's and trying to find shows or we were putting on shows and trying to find opponents for certain people. Mm-hmm. We would call other camps, and there was a guy we had as Rustam Habilov. So Dagestan, he wrecked Masvidal in the